Previously, we have discussed some of these things such as does, rats, phishing, and so on and so forth. But here, I want to go a step further and tell you about SQL injections, VPNs, proxy stores, apps, loggers, and so on and so forth. You will see how all these things will play a role later on throughout the course, but for the time being, you have SQL injections, which simply passing SQL queries to HTTP requests if they are not properly formatted by the PHP code on the server side. This can present a serious problem, and this is always one of the primary consideration of all the web developers out there. Later on, I will demonstrate how you can use these, formulate them, and there is a large amount of websites that are vulnerable out there primarily because the framework on which they are based are vulnerable, as well as the next up you have virtual private networks, VPNs. These are ways of anonymizing yourselves. Basically, if you have VPN providers somewhere, and if you want to anonymize yourself, you will route all the traffic through this VPN provider, and all the traffic between you and VPN provider will be heavily encrypted. So any other server out there that is receiving requests from you, it is actually receiving them from VPN. There is no real way of detecting or fighting your physical location unless the VPN provider actually gives it up, which doesn't really happen. If you, a big right one down below, you have proxies. Now, proxies are a less reliable way to staying anonymous, but you should always make it your common practice to use SOC 5 proxies. I will explain what these are. I will introduce them. When do we do proxy chains, and when I explain to you how you can actually stay anonymous while conducting these sort of activities, you will realize that you can route your connection to several proxies, but very soon you will see as well that doesn't always work. I mean, in the movies or something like that, you see people going through with 10, 20 different proxies. In reality, that would be very, very difficult to implement, primarily because of internet speeds. Remember, because of the available bandwidth, most of the free proxies out there are not very fast, and routing your connection to several of them will make it very difficult for you to do anything in a reasonable amount of time. There are, of course, paid proxies, but when you pay a proxy, you have a digital footprint somewhere, so you can be traced down below. You have Tor, and Tor is absolutely free, open source, and it's much faster than proxies. It's not faster than VPNs, but it is faster than proxies. It gives you an ability to torify your applications, which is means simply routing traffic through certain routes and using certain routers on the internet to actually you of just using router, but using certain devices on the internet for your package, for your connection to go through it. It can be slowed from time to time. It is not 100% guarantee. You will be anonymous to a very large extent if you're using Tor. There are ways of detecting, but they are highly unlikely to happen. Like 99.99% of time, you will be almost 100% anonymous, which is a very good way of functioning also. You have the Tor browser, which allows you to access dark web or hidden web, however you wish to call it. Basically, those are .onion websites, and they are not indexed by any of the search engines out there, and it cannot be accessed by a regular internet browser. From the regular internet browsing perspective, you cannot, if you open up Firefox, if you had your internet connection, and if you don't have internet connection or something of configured in a proper way to connect of a network or something of a kind, you will not be able to access any of the hidden web or dark webs or websites, services, and so on and so forth. That will show you how to access art.web and how to use it, as it has a vast amount of resources. They are at your disposal, most of them free, some of them paid, and so on and so forth. Down below you have VPS, These are virtual private services. It is a method of, it is a security. It can be viewed as a security layer. For example, if you have an Apache server running on your physical machine, you can have a virtual within that physical machine, which will serve as SQL server for that Apache server. This is done so that the SQL server cannot be accessed from outside an SQL board open on your physical machine. So only devices, only the programs, the users from the particular machine will be able to access the virtual machine. Whereas SQL server is a lot of back and forth actions here that might sound unclear or something like that, but I don't want you to worry about that. Now when I show you the examples, when you will get it into, you will understand it. I guarantee it to you. So no problems here. So there I am just introducing you to the terminology and giving you an idea of what is to come excellent. So we also have keyloggers, which are tools that are used to steal credentials, not only credentials but also used to extract information. If you manage to deploy a keylogger or a machine, you can configure it to send to the record all keystrokes and then to send them to email address to an FTP server. Today, keyloggers are advanced to an extent that they have 100 options or configurable to the fullest of extent, and you can do pretty much whatever you want with them. I mean, they have their basic functionalities. Still, basic functionality is still here to record keystrokes, but not only did they record keystrokes, for example, they can extract existing information as well. You can configure their behavior, how the sleeth level of the keylogger, how will it hide, where will it go, where will it be installed, what sort of information do you want to be, you want to extract, you want to monitor particular folder for activity, and you want to record it. You can configure them to take screenshots. You can configure them to use the camera on the device which you have, on which you had deployed the keylogger, to take a picture every 5 minutes or something like that. That wouldn't be the brightest of the ideas, because obviously somebody would see that you are taking picture, but this is just example of what you can do with them. And later on we will actually download the genuine keylogger and install it, deploy it, and I'll show you the methods, deployment, and how you can configure it as well. Although you should be very careful from where you download your tools such as keyloggers, remote administration, rootkey tools, and also so on and so forth, primarily because you never ever want to download a compiled binary file that is not open source, because you have no way of knowing what's in it, and you absolutely never want to run it on your computer. You might get what you want, a keylogger or something of a kind, but your computer might get infected with exactly the same keylogger that you plan to deploy somewhere, or with exactly the same rat that intended to deploy somewhere. So that's not the sort of a bright idea. You should use verified sources of such tools. I'll show you a few of them later on as I go over there, as I go over the internet, and I'll download them. But I'm just making it very clear here that you should be very careful with these things. And one of the foolproof method of doing this is actually considering a virtual machine and doing this sort of activity on that virtual machine. So even if you get infected or something of a kind, it doesn't matter. It's a virtual machine. You can reinstall at any time you want. Very fast, pretty much new information will be lost there. More importantly, the primary file system or your main physical machine will not be accessed from the virtual machine anyway. Down below you have the terminal. So terminal is basically an interface for you that allows you to control your operating system. Now Linux terminal is very powerful. We will be using it extensively. You will need to familiarize yourselves with it. I will familiarize you with it. I'll teach you how to use it. To some people it might seem a bit difficult, too, or a bit tricky at first sight. You know where there's a lot of there are a lot of commands to type in, how to memorize them, or where what to use where, and so on and so forth. But believe me, there is a certain logic to it, and once you figure it out, everything just files. I know about it. I know my heart about 30% of the possible commands out there regarding Linux terminals, and the rest I simply figure out with -h or --help. The system pretty much tells you everything you need to know. It helps you out to a great extent, and you're able to figure out a lot of things just from just understanding the basic logic, how it works, and so on. Now there will always, of course, be arguments, and then there'll be people saying, why would you use terminals? Why won't you just use GUI tools or something like that? The simpler answer is because they are not as nearly as powerful as the terminal tools are. Plus, terminal tools have far less dependencies, and most of the hacking tools are basically designed for terminals. They don't have GUIs. A lot of them do. They have them these days, but I might go over them briefly at a certain point of time, because it is not the GUI interfaces are not that relevant when you figure it out. Now, how to do it in the terminal? You will automatically by default know how to do it with the graphical user interface. For that particular program anyway, down below you have firewalls. Now, firewall is Linux is configured through itables command. You keep on passing arguments configuring in these firewalls. This is one of the main reasons why you should not be using any distribution of Windows for this particular tutorial. To follow this tutorial, you will need to install as I said previously, will need to install either Linux virtual machine or create a dual boot, something of a kind. I will of course show you how to do it. It is demonstrating great detail, but one of the main reasons the firewalls are one of the main reasons why we can't use Windows with these sort of purpose. Linux firewall is open source, and it has ridiculous amount of options. Ridiculous amount. I'm not hiding here. You can do with it pretty much whatever you want. You can configure, you can close open ports, forward connections via ports or via IP addresses. You can close, you can just forbid certain protocols on certain ports or forbid certain protocols for certain IP addresses, do all manner of forwarding and redirection, and so on and so forth. This is all available for free with a Linux firewall. Last, in Windows, you will have some of these options, but most of them you won't unless you, for example, buy a certain package or something like that, which is not something that we really want to do. Here, we want to keep this budget friendly, and we want to have a powerful firewall which can do pretty much whatever we wanted to do. Now, there'll be two ways of configuring this firewall, and if you are afraid of messing it up, don't worry, because most of the configurations that we will do will be short-lived configurations. So to say, primarily because all the configurations made to the firewall from the IP table command unless specified, otherwise it will be temporary and they will until the next system resets. There is a way to circumvent this, of course, to configure it to you. The firewall pools is in the configuration file directly, and thereby making the changes permanent, which is also one of the ways of doing it, but I don't generally prefer it. I prefer to have a script somewhere which you can run at any time, and it will configure firewall by default. This is primarily because this is primary because you want to have it. You won't have your tool set then a USB stick or somewhere linear or something of kind, and you will have this quick script which you generate, and then they have performed these tasks for you in an automated fashion. It's really simple. I'll show you how to make these scripts. You don't need to necessarily need some advanced programming knowledge or anything of the kind. Basically, with these scripts are a list of Linux terminal commands, which we will do anyways. So basically, this script will consist out of a list of those commands. It to you just change the model of this. Swipe to be an executable file and run it. And those commands are passed to the system, and those tasks are finished in an automated fashion by default. Anyway, one of the final things that I wish to address you and reverse shells. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of reverse shells out there that you can use. I will pick a few of that. We will use depending on the framework, depending on the reverse environment, of course, that we want to infect. But in essence, what reverse shells are? Reverse shells are, the name itself says, you have a program with which you infect another device, and that program opens up the reverse connection from that device back to you. So you can keep on passing commands, you can keep on controlling the system, even though you are nowhere near it. There are different type of courses today with routers and so on and so forth. With such firewalls, you need to do a lot of extra configuration, and there are problems to be solved and add addresses. You will see how when you're trying to break into single computer, something you need to break into the router first. Usually you need to break into the router first unless you're performing these phishing sort of attacks, or there is web server is something of a kind running in the background. But attacking a private device, private computer, which is usually what people do as preludes to bigger hacks because they want to extract some sort of information, is something of a kind from, let's say, a company's employees. That's network administrator, is somebody like that. So this will, one of the basic factor would be to attack a home router, change DNS setting there, and try to steal credentials in such a way, or to put the computer in the DNC of the router, demilitarized zone, so that the router is no longer ineffective for that device. Rather, instead it just forwards the traffic that device regardless. So that's those of the types of text that you can do. But the reverse shells will depend on the choice of your in the other environment that you are trying to infect, and will depend on the choice of attack route. So see you in the next tutorial.